Hello and welcome to another Talking Points Chats. Today I'm with Dave Danto and Scott Wharton. Hello, Scott.
Hey, how's it going?
It's great to see you again. Let me just briefly introduce you. Scott is the CEO of a company called Tandem PV, and I've known Scott. I don't know. I think maybe I met you at Broadstop, but I certainly knew you at VidTel. I found him to be articulate and wise, and it was a huge loss for enterprise communications and video when he left to go save our planet at a sustainable power company. So it's great to see you again, Scott, and we want to get to the interesting stuff around enterprise video, but I thought we better start off with some obligatory stuff about your new gig. So how's it going at Tandem PV, and when are you coming back to enterprise comms?
Well, I mean, it's going really well. I've been at Tandem PV now for about over a year, and I think you noted in some of the notes that I tend to stay at companies for about 7-8 years, and I was at Logitech for about 8 years, so it's a little more than a year. So I feel like I'm ramping up in the learning curve, and building one of the world's best solar panels that'll hopefully help save the planet. Hopefully, we'll talk more about that, but it's been fun.
Why did you make the change? Well, why the change? Not just the change of roles. We all change roles, but why that specific space?
I mean, I think it was a couple of things. I think one thing that most people don't know about me is that when I was in business school a million years ago, I did my internship at the Solar Energy Industry Association, and my goal was to get into solar. And I fell in love with solar, but it was way too early in the industry, so I was kind of depressed, moping around, school, trying to figure out what to do. And I'm like, hey, there's this internet voice over IP thing. So I ended up having, a journey, I'd say like a decades long pivot into communications, which I loved, but I still kept up with solar. And I think now where the world the industry is mature, the world is on fire. And I thought it was a good opportunity for me to use my skill set to do something that was, that would help in that area. And I certainly think that communications is valuable from a clean point of view, and that we're helping people do video and not flying, et cetera. But I just felt like there was a desire to do something different, more, and I found the right team and the right opportunity, and I took it.
I love what you're doing, Scott. I got a lot of passion around that myself. Back in 2008, I put in a huge solar array on my roof, and then, of course, had an argument with my neighbor about their trees that they just planted at the same time. And then I've updated that whole system about 10 years ago, and that was also pretty exciting and rewarding. I've got 2 EVs. I'm now researching heat pumps and stuff, and so I love what you're doing. I think all this stuff is the future. Now I run into a lot of people that think it's all a sham or distraction. They don't like green energy. They think it's a waste of time. I imagine you run into some of those people too. What do you say to those people?
I think part of what people don't understand is that the industry has changed so dramatically, even in the last few years. So you said you installed your last system 10 years ago. So what most people don't know listening is that solar has declined in cost by 90%, 90, in the last 10 years. So I think a lot of people's mindset has not kept up with the changes. So solar used to be this expensive green thing that you did if you were only environmentally friendly. Now it's the cheapest source of energy on the planet. And part of what I'm going to do is drive the cost down, even lower. So I think, one of the drivers, obviously you want clean energy, but I think the bigger driver is greed. It's just the cheapest way to go. And I think most people's mindsets have not caught up with some of the facts. It's cheaper than wind, natural gas, coal, nuclear by far, more than anything. And it's easy to get.
When I speak to friends and industry associates in the industry that have made the decision, all they want to tell me about is how much they're selling the energy back to the energy grid, how much money they're making, not just on their use, but what they're making in terms of cash. So it's something that's very popular amongst them.
Yeah, I mean, so to give you an example, last year in the U.S., of all the new energy that was added, solar was about 70% of it. In China, they built more solar last year in China than the United States has deployed in our history. There's a lot of good stuff happening in the world in solar that I think most people don't know, because it's one of these exponential curves that, I think our human minds feebly, it's hard for us to kind of get our heads around that, but that's what's happening.
The tech has changed, and your company is called Tandem PV. So normally PV stands for photovoltaic. And maybe it does in your case too, but I was reading about your company, and it uses perovskite-based tandem panels. What is that?
Yeah, so we're building a technology called perovskites. It's a crystalline structure. It was found about 200 years ago by Dr. Perovsky. And it basically is this miracle semiconductor. It is a photovoltaic too. And basically what it does is it's 200 times thinner than traditional silicon. It uses only about 10% of the energy to make it. And the reason why our company is called Tandem is we actually take the current technology in silicon and ours, and we create a solar panel sandwich. That's why the name is Tandem. And the value of that is you can basically capture a lot more sun than you can with the silicon panel. So for example, your panel on your roof, well, today's panels are about 21% efficient. So that means for every 100 beams of light that get captured, 20 get turned to electrons. We're already at 27%, going up to 30. So we're already 30% better than what's out there. And that's part of what this new technology will do, both make it better and cheaper, which is kind of what we need, right? It's true. And I also decided, why did I jump into this area? I really like innovating, coming up with new things. I don't really like when people just yell at people to do the right thing because it's good. I like that people do the right thing because it's good for them also. And I thought this is a way to kind of harvesting the skills that I had over, many years, like you guys, to be able to innovate in this particular area. And I think so far it's going really well. We now have a world record for solar efficiency. So we're kind of the world's technology leader in Silicon Valley. And we're on the verge of building our first factory to be the first perovskite factory in the US. So having fun.
Now, I looked over your LinkedIn profile preparing for this interview, and I did see a clear pattern of your 8-year itch. You spent 8 years at BroadSoft, 8 years at Vidtel, 8 years at Logitech, and I'm assuming 8 years in high school. Now, of those 24 years, which job do you think most prepared you to be CEO of Tandem? I'm assuming Vidtel.
I mean, I think what we would all say is every job in some way prepares you for the next one. I think Vidtel was great in that I think there's a very big difference between being CEO of a startup and advise. Like I was a senior leader at BroadSoft for 8 years, but there's a difference between advising and doing. So I think that helped a lot. I would also say I think I learned a lot about Logitech, about how to be a leader, how to apply ideas at scale. And I think also there's a lot of value in working at a larger company and really understanding how it works, to be able, especially when you're working with utilities, to be able to understand the mindset of how bigger companies work. I think one of the Daves, you've worked a lot with bigger companies, so you understand like going from big to small, like how valuable that is. So I think probably a lot of both, but I think I applied a lot of what I learned at Logi, partly because I was really lucky. It was an internal startup within a big company, and I think what most people don't know is when I started, I think the group was about 50 people and $62 million, of which most of the revenue was the BCC 950 and C930 webcam. So essentially, we were just, even that revenue was kind of retail-ish. So we kind of built the group from scratch with a small group up to over $1 billion a year. And so it kind of went from internal startup to big. So I think that experience is also hopefully going to help me here do the same thing.
So let's take advantage of that that segue a little bit there and talk about where enterprise communications is right now. When you started up Vidtel, you had a vision. A lot of people at the time, other companies, other individuals, myself included, had a vision that we should be, doing video telephony. We should be doing anything can call anything, anywhere. It should just all immediately connect. And I guess if I'm being fair and external to the whole space, I would probably say that vision lost. That's not really the direction that we're going in right now. We seem to have some new quasi monopolies that are doing, and what do you think about that? I mean, was it still the right thing? Is it still the right thing for the future? Are we in a bubble, or did we just lose the opportunity and these monopolies are going to be the way to go?
Yeah, so I think when we say Vidtel, it was 2008. We were the first ones to use Amazon Web Services for video, like arguing the first cloud-based video conferencing service from that perspective. And I would say I kind of had it half right and half wrong. So let's deal with the wrong part. I think the wrong part I had this idea of interoperability like the PSTN. Clearly, that has not happened. I think it will never happen. It's more like instant messaging or on your phone where you have an app base. So I think from that perspective, you do have anybody can call anybody just like we did. It's fairly easy, but it's done in a proprietary way. And just like IM has got, you have multiple apps. I think video conferencing collaboration will be the same way. And I think part of the reason why that works is it's just easier to innovate from one app to another as opposed to having some global standards. I think that is lost. That was kind of the vision that I had, part of it for VidTel. And at the same time, we can talk about where the industry's gone. I think there are things like direct guest join, which as a small, medium business now running video are magical. Like I could not run the business without that, but it still kind of sucks. Like it's okay. Like I'd like to see it more like your iPhone where you have a full robust app versus these neutered apps that have this kind of mindset of scarcity. Like we need to shrink the experience and make it be worse and shitty versus just giving people a full experience. Like I think it's one area where I think the industry has got part in the way there, but it could do a lot better, especially as a small, medium business where I can tell you I switch back and forth every day between Teams and Google and Zoom and sometimes Tencent, others.
That's kind of changing now with AI because the way they're taking notes and everything, it's getting a little scattered. But I want to go back to you had a great run at Logi. You talked about this transformation of a small to a larger business. You inherited, as I recall, you mentioned it, the BCC. What product was that? The
BCC 950, kind of the
BCC,
eyeball on a stick.
Yeah, rolls off the tongue. And when you left, the products had more natural names. Here's the Brio, but the things that do roll off the tongue. I want to ask you, over those 8 years, which of those products was to you the most exciting and why that you launched?
Wow, I mean, it's a hard question because I think so many of them for different reasons. I think go through a few of them. Meetup, I think, was a kind of an iconic product because I think we changed the industry structure from at the time. If you remember, like everything was a speakerphone, and we use what people will call design thinking to say, all right, how is this the right way to do it? And I think what we realize is why are people looking down at this plastic box at a table? Is that the right way to communicate, or should the audio be where the human face is? We said it should really be there. So we kind of came up with this idea. And as you can imagine, we got incredible amount of resistance from the market internally. Like you cannot change the way people work. Everyone is used to using a speakerphone. This is the way Cisco and Lifesize and Poly at the time dominated the market. But we did, but that was really hard. And Meetup is now the best-selling video product ever. I think they've sold well over 1 million units. I mean, that was one. I would say even on the audio side, on the software side, I think what we did with auto framing and AI and continue to do is really revolutionary, and that it, instead of having one little dot with sharing, like it really allows you to see people effectively rather than just see a bunch of ants in a meeting. I also love Sight, our Sight product. We were the first ones to have a center of the room camera. I think that was another interesting example where we initially said we should copy Cisco because Cisco is really smart. And they must have the right idea. And we did some prototypes with 4 Brios at the front of the room. And we found out it's kind of terrible. It doesn't really change the angle that much. And then we came up with a prototype where we did 4 Brios hacked up in the middle of the room. We're like, that kind of works. So then it took us a long time to get that product right, but I'm proud of that. And then I'm on a Logi dock right now, which has not done as commercially as well, but I think we took a whole bunch of different concepts around speakerphone and video controls and a dock, and we put them all into one product, and it's still one of my favorites. So I think there's a bunch of stuff that we have a lot to be proud of that are still doing well. And I didn't even talk about Rally Bar and a whole bunch of other things.
Well, you have the terrific opportunity to have the both sides of the bathroom door perspective. You're providing the technology for people to use for this kind of collaboration for a very long time. And now you find yourself in the role of having to use these tools as part of your day-to-day business. Is there any insight there that, maybe you see it differently now that you're on this side of the camera as opposed to the manufacturing side, or are there things that you're seeing you now agree with, you like the logic that you used, or that you disagree with? What's that insight now that the perspective has changed?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially because my company is 25 people, so I am the head of IT. And I run the video conferencing, both procurement and setup and all that. And I would say that I think a lot of the solutions, what I found, even from a Logitech point of view, are really geared to very large companies that have armies of people who know how to set up and configure things. And I would say it is very, very difficult to do that practically at a small, medium business. I mean, just in a couple examples, we have this idea of one touch to join meetings, which I think is brilliant. But I can't tell you how hard it was to set up a Zoom room with Google calendaring, just almost impossible. And part of it was I have an outsourced IT firm. They couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. And I've been in the industry. I've been literally building the menus. I went to Google support. They don't know anything about Zoom rooms, right? They're like, oh, we'll help you do Google Meet. I'm like, I don't want to do Google Meet. You go to Zoom, they don't know anything about calendaring. So I got stuck in the middle of this vortex where I probably took for granted that, HSBC has 10 people who know how to set this up. And once you've got it set it up. And then the other thing I would say is the complexity of the menus for Teams and Zoom. They have so many features. It is so complicated. I literally spent hours on a bunch of things like how do you turn off the waiting room and how do you do this security thing and how do you stop needing the host and the co-host? And there's just so much complexity that I think if you're an SMB, it's just overwhelming. And I think it kind of reinforces why I think someone like Meeting Owl is doing well. Because this stuff is great, but it's just too hard for most SMBs. Just put an owl in the middle, kind of works. It kind of sucks too, but it's easy.
Well, I think that's one
Wow.
of the reasons probably why we accept less than optimal solutions, because we give up. We don't want to play with it or try and figure out how to make it better. And even if somebody does know how, it's too hard to figure out in many cases.
Yeah, I think I think I knew this inherently at Logitech, and we had a lot of discussions about having an SMB oriented product as opposed to an enterprise oriented product. I think my experience now reinforced it, and I've shared it with my former colleagues across the industry. I think we all basically worked at large companies, so I think we're a little bit hidden and abstracted from all that complexity, and even just cabling, and it's really hard. So I would say I think part of what the industry needs is just another clean look at how do you grossly simplify everything? Not for an enterprise because they can figure it out, but more for SMBs who really struggle with this stuff. And quite frankly, I think some of them will just put a laptop at the table, which was kind of the thing we joked about. But if you think about it, putting a laptop at the table, it's so easy. It just works.
Huh. I want to go back to the meetup that you mentioned earlier. I was a big fan of that product, and you highlighted, moving the audio off the table, off the speakerphone, up to the front of the room. That was kind of a technological breakthrough because cameras and speakers which vibrate aren't normally compatible. Now that's kind of become, table stakes. As Dave Danto points out regularly, there's a lot of video bars in the market. Do you think what happened there? Was that a technical breakthrough or is it more of a mental shift? What happened?
I think it was a little combination of both, and then different ones depending on the timing. So I think the first one, as we talked about, was the mental breakthrough. People don't need a speakerphone. You can convince people not to use that. That was one. I know we had a bunch of patents on handling the vibration, especially with the camera at the time moving. I think the other thing we did is there was very simple and very expensive, and we were able to basically take a mechanical PTZ and put it into Meetup. I think that was a big innovation, and doing it without screwing up the audio. That was quite hard. I think one of the innovations with Meetup too is that we did not try to overcomplicate it by putting the compute inside the box. It was basically I'll call it a dumb USB device, which was actually a selling point. I think there were some people who wanted to move early to a bar, and there were some people who tried it. We looked at it. I would say even when I started in 2015, there was a vision of moving to the bar. I think our view was, the market wasn't ready. Like the compute wasn't there. Nobody really wanted Windows into a machine. So I think one of the other innovations we did was a business model innovation. And do you remember when we did the kits where we had these reference designs?
Yes.
You would not believe the shit I took internally for building that. People are like, this is so complicated, and you're meeting in the channel, and David Danto remembers at the time, I think Polly was reselling everything. And the problem with that is you're taking $1,000 computer and marking it up to like 4K. So that was like a quasi business model. And I think it was complex, but it worked. Like it set the reference design for the entire industry. And then I think then we kept looking at, all right, when is the market going to be good enough from an Android point of view and a compute point of view to put it in there? And I think we were a little late. And I'd say Neat and Poly were, leapfrogged us. I think we were able to leapfrog them. But I think at the time we realized that the market was not ready. So it was like a series of things lined up, a series of innovations. And then I would say where the market's moved to now is actually moving away from all these mechanical moving parts and just moving to all digital. Yep. Because when you're doing more software, I'd say the quality of a digital camera is largely worse than an optical one. But if you're moving the camera a lot, it doesn't matter because then you get rid of that kind of tennis effect. You really want to be able to move the camera on a dime. And that's why I think the market is moving to all digital cameras.
And also with AI now, you're actually able to create, whether you're doing it in the cloud or in the device, you're able to give everybody their own box, whether, it's small or large or however you want to call it. I mean, I've forgotten all of the various trade names for the same thing, but it's essentially making a better picture in a way that we're used to because we've watched television all our lives.
Absolutely. So, I mean, one of my favorite features now is the Rally Bar Huddle, which I use in one of our smaller rooms. And the ability to pick everyone out using a digital zoom and just extract out each person. I think that feature is just killer. I use it every day. It's in some ways, I like it better than having the bigger room in sight because you have 3-4 people in a room. It just works so well. You don't need to do anything. It's the other thing I like about it is you show up in the room and there's no change in human behavior. It just works.
Okay, so you said you're now not there anymore. You're kind of out of it and using it. So you're now using Zoom and you're now using Microsoft. What are your thoughts of those companies now that they're not partners of yours anymore?
Well, I think the market has kind of settled into a slower level of innovation. I mean, I said there's a couple of challenges. One is there are 3 companies now. And I don't think that Microsoft really feels like they have huge competition anymore. And I would say Microsoft is at its best when someone's breathing down their neck. And the reality is I think Teams now has the largest market share by far. So I think
who's breathing down their neck is the Department of Justice.
Well, maybe I guess that's a different discussion. Yeah. Although they seem to be very good at kind of skirting around that. But I would say Teams is one. And kudos to Microsoft for kind of letting Zoom push them. And then they innovated enough from where they were. And if you remember where Teams was at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, I think you can only look at 2 video. I mean, it was awful, right? So it's way better now. And I think Zoom was very innovative. And now, there's, like I said, I think their stuff is very complex too. So I think everybody's stuff is kind of complex. So that is a challenge across the board. And I think when the market settles into a dynamic, when your complexity is the rule of the day, I think Microsoft usually wins that.
Now you say that as a true statesman. You're no longer a partner. You can say what's really on your mind here. So let's continue down this free-form conversation. David and I have been talking a lot about a new thing from Microsoft called MDEP, and I know you're familiar with it. It's Microsoft expansion into Android. Now that's an area that you actually spearheaded at Logi. You had to learn Android. You had to bring all that in. You had to figure out the processors and figure out the operating system. Yeah. What was your reaction to MDEP? And you were at Logi at the time. What was your reaction to MDEP when you first heard about it?
I mean, my first reaction was not positive. Partly because we had, like you said, when I started at Logitech in this group, we actually had a total number of 0 non-firmware engineers. And then when I left, 3/4 of the team was software. So we built up an incredible investment around Microsoft, Zoom, and Google to make it really work well. So, the idea of having to kind of scrap a lot of what we had done, it's not a positive thought. And then the other thing is it's a classic, lowering the barriers to entry by commoditizing things. So throwing our stuff out, commoditizing it. I think that's a classic playbook that not only Microsoft was doing, but also Qualcomm on the chip side where they were moving up the stack. So that was definitely a difficult challenge. And then I think as I've learned, I think part of the reason why Microsoft did it was not specific to communications. It was more, a lot of things with Microsoft is a bigger picture. So I think they were reacting more to Google and Apple. So Google and Apple had their own OS. They had their own lockdown, versions of an OS, Google and Android. And I think Microsoft was reacting to that across the board. I think this is just something like, hey, where else can we use this? And it was like communications, but I don't think there was any master plan that was thinking through, all right, how am I going to screw over these companies? It was more like, hey, let me just take something that is a big corporate mandate to expand Android. But I think it definitely has a big effect on the industry with Microsoft being the dominant player, that it kind of hurts the incumbent players who have invested all that energy, and it helps people who, have not, that are looking to more the commoditization players.
Well, it's interesting. I'd love your take on this for a second. Again, don't reveal anything that you can't, although you're not in the space anymore. As we are having this conversation, we still don't know how Microsoft is going to be treating legacy partners that don't go to MDEP. We've heard conversations to the extent that, at a certain point, the line in the sand is going to drop, and if you're not on it, you're not going to be certified. We've heard other people say that, if you were certified, you're always certified, and we'll grandfather the other versions in. And the reason we don't know is because it probably hasn't been decided yet. They're doing a lot of testing of the waters. But what do you think will happen if a Logitech or an HP Poly or somebody else who's been very powerful, neat in terms of creating these Android devices don't buy in? Do you think how will the tug of war end?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that now, being out of that. But what I suspect will happen is, even if they grandfather it in, let's just say that happens. Practically speaking, I don't think that will work for the vendors that are grandfathered in, because once Microsoft starts pushing, or any big company says, all right, I have two versions. I have the grandfather version. Oh, and I have this new shiny object thing, and this is the one that we prefer. It doesn't matter. Like the large customers are not sophisticated enough to know the difference. Like they're going to hear, and also messages play the game of telephone. When you go down into the sales team, they're not going to understand the subtlety of that. So I think there's always a danger when you have a new standard, and it is a new standard, right? And you say, we like this new standard. I think it's very difficult to maintain the old way of doing things. I think that's the biggest challenge, is this requires some nuance, and it's in a world with big companies and big sales teams where nuance just gets lost. Like, its simplicity wins the day.
When MDEP was first announced, I think it was at Enterprise Connect 23, almost 2 years ago. Yeah. It seemed very specific to Teams meeting rooms. I've been thinking that it's going to be much bigger than that. You just made a reference to that. I did a post suggesting it might be a future smartphone standard, Android version for smartphones. What do you think Microsoft's thinking about MDEP? Do you think it's much bigger than meeting rooms?
I do. I think the meeting room is the tail wagging the dog. I think Microsoft is competing with Google, and they want to have their own controlled version of Android, which I think is very rational on their part. They'll do that rather than have a balkanized version or take Google's version. So yeah, I think it is bigger than that.
Who do you think are going to be the winners and the losers in this? Obviously you have Jabra and Barco and Yealink as being initially signed on to this. You're getting the pushback from some of the other established players like Logi and Neat. How do you think do you think it's going to turn out? Do you think it's going to be quick? Do you think it's going to be dragged out? But give us a sense of where you think it's going to be in the next 6 to 8 months.
Well, I don't think anything was quickly in this industry, especially with regarding to operating systems, because you can't do a flash cut over. I mean, I would say that there's like a tactical winners and losers, and then there's the overall. The first one's clearer cut, the other question less so. I think companies who have invested a lot of effort into building their own software that have to migrate it obviously will lose out a little bit. So those are the existing incumbents. If you're a new player trying to get in, it helps you, right? You don't need to invest $100 million in software. Having said that, I think there are big barriers to entry now, where most big companies are kind of standardizing on one platform or the other. So I don't think they're going to easily switch. And there's going to be a lot of time in the transition. And I think the companies I think companies like Logi and Poly and others will transition over time, probably successfully because they have great teams and products and big switching costs because it's not only, we're not talking about a bar anymore. We're talking about systems and software and management and global relationships. So I think it's a bump in the road for them. I don't think it'll ultimately be catastrophic to any of them, but it's annoying, certainly annoying.
I want to pull a thread there on that HP Poly thing. I mean, Poly was, a head-to-head competitor for Logi. You guys were fiercely head-to-head competing with many of the same products and portfolio. When you heard that HP was going to acquire Poly, that must have been a concern for you. What was your thoughts back then?
Well, let me just say, I think there were different views within the company. My view was a little different than most. I was actually happy about the HP deal. So I think, who is not happy? I think people were not happy because they're like, oh, there's a big company now with deep pockets. They will consolidate it. I've found in my experience that those promises in M&A usually don't happen. I think you see that now playing out where the promise of all the big companies and all the synergy don't work because usually the big company loses interest in the smaller thing. I think that's kind of what's playing out now with HP and Poly. I think the second reason why I was happy about it was that there were worse alternatives. Like I think HP buying Poly basically meant that Logi played on certain rules and HP played by the same rules. And I think we felt like Logitech would do well with those rules. If the company had gone to like a cloud provider like a Microsoft or Zoom, because remember at the time, Google had their own hardware effectively. So I think there was a concern that, oh, maybe the cloud providers would get into the hardware business. We were concerned that that was an outcome. We were also concerned that maybe a Chinese competitor would jump in that would have different profit expectations. That was also a concern. So going to an HP, which had expectations of higher profit margins and playing by the same enterprise rules. I mean, my own opinion, I'm not speaking for everyone there. I think we felt like this is good. We know how to play this game. We'll probably do pretty well. Obviously, there will be some benefits in the merger, but we thought overall it would help Logi. And I think that's been largely true, where Logi over the years has continued to gain share empirically, and Poly has continued to lose some share.
I was thinking, yeah, I guess you were ahead of me on that. I've had the thought that HP or that Logi might get out of video, and it's based on a whole bunch of things, right? It's based on competing with HP, which, as you said, may not have been a big threat. The departure of Bracken, the departure of you. The entry of Cisco into the devices ecosystem for Microsoft, the shift to AI and other factors. When I say a shift of AI, I mean now Logi's got to build new keyboards and stuff like that with an AI key. So I was thinking that and no new products. We haven't. I mean, you mentioned the meetup too, but not a whole lot of new products. So I was thinking we might be kind of at the end of Logi's command and video. Now, Mr. Danto and others feel I might be wrong, and maybe I am wrong. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're wrong. I think that first of all, the company has said publicly it's the most profitable group, and money talks and profits talk. It's a sizable group now with leading market share. I think companies usually don't exit things where they're market leaders. And I mean, one of the things I'm proud of is I left behind an incredible team that's still there, that still is carrying on a lot of the roadmap and vision that we had put in place. And I think they're still executing pretty well. And I'm sure some of it you've seen, some of it you haven't, but I'm pretty confident. I mean, I still keep in touch with my team regularly and I miss them a lot. And I think they're doing a great job.
Well, I think it would be fair to say from an external perspective, without pulling on too many threads, that they have not been as visible or as loud with Bracken leaving and with you leaving. They've been a lot more close to the vest and a lot more one message for consumers and not a lot of briefings or other information. So that would be another reason for the perspective that we were a little bit worried about them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my wife would say Bracken and I are more loudmouths, right? We're out there. We like the public eye. The team that's there maybe likes it less so. than we did, relatively speaking, but I think they're equally competent. So I'm not worried there.
And there have been some really recently some really good hires, and some people coming over from Poly, in that space. So it's going to be interesting to watch how all the competition in the space develops.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other observation is that the market's kind of getting into a stasis now, which usually helps the incumbents. And I think it will be difficult for some of the smaller players to hang on as some of there's more portfolio expansion and consolidation maybe among vendors and customers. And as much as I think Microsoft as the dominant player in the space wants to encourage new entrants, it's just getting harder and harder. And I think there are a lot of companies on the buyer side, they don't want to have 20 choices. And I think ultimately Microsoft tries to create more players, but they don't like it either because it just creates more QA work for them and people they need to support. So I suspect that, you didn't ask me, but I think what will happen over time is I think there'll be some continued market consolidation. Given the fact that the market is not growing that fast, it's probably reverting back to a pre-pandemic growth of, or maybe slower than that, slow growth, relatively mature industry now.
Well, Dave and I have spoken about this quite a bit, and certainly something I'd like to get your comments on, because one of the biggest movers in the space right now is this idea that Cisco is producing endpoints that are natively Microsoft compatible. And if you're talking about a large enterprise customer that's got a Microsoft contract and a Cisco contract and a Logi contract, I can't see Logi being anything other than the third player in a two-person dance. So that's probably one of the biggest market factors going on right now for those big companies that, as you point out, are trying to consolidate vendors.
So I would say I had a different view when I was at Logitech. I probably still have a different view now, not based on being there, but just more based on observation. I think that if you look at the unit volume, Logi versus Cisco, I think Logitech's like 10 times bigger. So Cisco has a lot of revenue, but they still have huge expensive systems that they're selling to a handful of customers. I think generally speaking, my observation then, and I think now, is they're not winning a lot of new logos. They're just maintaining their existing logos. And then I think what Cisco is really good at is they were really good at very high, low volume, expensive, complicated stuff. Logitech is generally good at the opposite, high volume, reasonably priced stuff. So I think the market is moving into an area where Logitech's just better and now has a brand. And I don't think Cisco really makes that transition. I mean, yes, was the announcement going to Teams rooms? Would it give some customers the excuse to not do anything? Yes. Did I see, or do we see now Cisco winning a whole bunch of new customers? Not really. So I don't think Cisco is well suited for this new world. It's just not. I'm not saying they're going to be gone, but on the other hand, I got to think for Cisco as a $50 billion company with this really tiny hardware business, like, is it strategic for them? Are they excited about it? I think the answer is ultimately no. Maybe that doesn't happen today, but I'm just looking at the way Cisco behaves. They usually, if something is slow growth to low growth or no growth, they usually get out of it over time. So I think Cisco, they're an interesting case where, let's see if they're in the business 3 to 5 years from now. I don't know why they would. It's just not interesting to them.
I want to shift gears a little bit. We're running out of time. I want to shift to Alianza. For those of you that don't know, Scott is a board member of Alianza. Alianza provides communication solutions to service providers, kind of like your BroadSoft days all over again. The company got a recent boost, what do we call it, an I told you so moment, when Microsoft announced the end of sales for its Metaswitch products, the Metaswitch acquisition. Do you think that base of service providers is up for a replacement from Alianza or another service provider platform, or do you think they're just going to go to OTT over-the-top partners?
I think it'll be a combination of both, but absolutely. I mean, first of all, I would say I love Alianza for a couple of reasons. One is I love the team and I love Brian, the CEO. They're just great people, and they just get up every morning and just quietly and consistently execute. I think the second thing that's really fun for me, and in many ways, I spent a bunch of my early career at BroadSoft building up all of these businesses, selling the telcos, and they're completely reversing it. And I get to be a small part of that. So it's kind of fun to basically rip out everything that you built in a way. and kind of keeps me in a world that I'm not that much into, but I get to still play in because of Alianza. And I think what's happening is the Alianza is just uniquely suited to be taking this business that most people are saying, it used to be very strategic, but it's not. VoIP telephony is not strategic. It's just an app now. And the fact that they can basically take advantage of a business that all their competitors are saying, for the same reason I said video conferencing, it's boring, it's small, it's not growing. Why don't we shed that to someone else? Alianza, I think, is uniquely suited, maybe the only one that can just run the table and go to all these telcos and say, why are you running and maintaining this thing? Like, just turn it over to us. You save money. We'll run it better and cheaper. So I think it's, sometimes there are businesses like AI that are new and complex and they grow and they're exciting. And Alianza in some ways is the opposite of that, but great business, and that people are still going to be making telephone calls. Now to your second question, will some of it move over the top? Sure. But I think if you look at many technologies, it takes years and years and decades to kind of unwind. And I think Alianza is both well positioned to kind of, as I said, run the table on that, and then be the friendly player to the cloud where they can white label to them, to these telcos. And then if they do that, which they are doing, I think there's a whole bunch of things that they can add to the portfolio, because at the end of the day, what I see is Alianza is not a voice provider. They're really a wholesale provider to telcos. And if you think about a telco as a great channel to SMBs, there's like no shortage of things that they could sell to them in the future. Obviously, voice is one of those key things, but there'll be other things.
So I know that we were talking about Microsoft Teams and Zoom before, and I know that they're using their own CPaaS solution built into that. Can you kind of comment on that instead of going with one of the bigger guys?
I don't know if they've announced publicly what they use under the hood, but they do have their own solution. I would say it's reasonably good now. We run our board meetings on it, and I think it speaks to that there are going to be a group of people who just are happy with Teams and Zoom or Google Meet. I think they speak to a group of people who are like, you know what, I don't want to make $1 or nothing on Teams. I want to have my own solution, and I bundle it in. And I think they have that. So I think that's kind of their position is, we'll work with Teams and Zoom and integrate with them. I think they also do a bunch of SIP trunking to Teams, which is a pretty big business. Or they've got their own solution that they'll keep, enhancing. Will it ever be as good as Zoom or Microsoft? Probably not. Will it be good enough? 80-20 rule? Probably.
On that video solution, do you think the Alianza video solution, do you think they'll build out a room solution, or is it just desktop and mobile devices?
I mean, I think their strategy is not to compete head to head with Zoom and Microsoft, but to have something that is good enough for telcos to wrap around into a hosted cloud PBX solution. So I would never say never, but I think right now I don't see that that's part of their overall strategy as far as I know it.
Do you know what the general feedback is from customers that are using the solution that they offer today? I mean, are people pretty much satisfied with it?
I don't have a lot of data on it, but I think it falls into two camps. I think there are people who are happy with Zoom and Microsoft, et cetera, and want something that's more robust. And I think there are some people who are like, oh, it's included? Cool. And as it's been getting better over time, I'm guessing there are more people are going to be like, oh, cool, for free. I use my own brand. I get it as part of my telephony solution. Why not? And I think that's the way Alianza is even using it internally. Like of course, they have Zoom and Teams calls, but I think for a lot of their calls, like the Alianza solution is pretty good.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting space. We had that first generation dominated by BroadSoft, but GenBan and Metaswitch, they've all been acquired since then. Now we see these new companies, Alianza, Intermedia, Uma, and Reach, all going after that base. Do you see the other two, GenBan and Cisco, walking away from that space?
Well, we talked about Cisco a little bit before. Like, I think Cisco's strategy, if you look at what they're doing and what they say publicly, they're really going after, they're becoming a security company and a data routing company. So I just don't see how this telephony stuff is that interesting to them. You don't see them innovating there in WebEx like you do in other places. So to me, it's just a question of timing, but that's my own personal opinion. I think the main difference between GenBan and Alianza is that GenBan is more like an old BroadSoft kind of solution where you sell it on-prem, whereas Alianza is really pure cloud, outsourced, white label. If you look at it from that point of view, okay, there are a couple of tiny players in this space, but there's really nobody quite like Alianza in that way. And I think it's just so compelling that if you're a big telco, why would you continue to throw money and people and resources at running this thing when you could just outsource it and save money? Then there's the other, irony. The irony is that a lot of the people who've been working in this space, like us, have been doing it for decades. Some of the people running BroadSoft and GenBand, they're retiring, just like they used to do in the Class 5 switches. So I think increasingly it's going to be hard. How do you find a Class 5 switch or BroadSoft switch person in Louisiana or Indiana? You're not even going to find the labor to run it. So just outsource it.
Well, I think the next big step for Alianza is to expand internationally. So I'll let you use this podcast right now to go ahead and announce that if you'd like.
I won't announce it, but I wouldn't say it's a bad idea.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up the time we got here. Scott, I can't thank you enough for taking some time with us. I know you're about to embark on a European trip. I guess you're going to go to Italy. That should be interesting. I hear there's good solar there too.
I hear that also, and I'm sneaking in. I'm going to the world's biggest solar conference next week, and it's one of those conferences like Enterprise Connect where you don't get a minute to breathe, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And thanks for the opportunity to go down memory lane with you guys. It's really fun.
We'll get you back on in another year or two and see how things are going there, and then find out what your next 8-year journey is going to be.
Would love to. Anytime, guys. Thank you.